In the first morning sit, we've been sending metta in the beginning to those people who live in our hearts. Is this good sound, everyone? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then we extend the circle. And in some indigenous communities, that circle extends 7 generations before us and 7 generations ahead of us. And in the Buddhist tradition, particularly the Mahayana tradition, that goes even further into the Bodhisattva ideal. And before I share some words around it, I wanted to say why it makes sense, why the Bodhisattva ideal makes sense to me. Maybe I should just read the definition first, actually. Yeah. So, the vow of the Bodhisattva is that we will not go into nirvana or final freedom until every single suffering being has entered with us. One has to understand what this means. Our awakening is not a personal triumph. I love that. We do not, because we're just talking about doing, right? I'm going to triumph over this obstacle. I'm going to get to nirvana. We do not have to win a spiritual sprint. We are one mind. Awakening is to penetrate more and more deeply into this truth. The world is alive, and as long as there is suffering, then this living whole is shattered. Whether it is my suffering or the suffering of another, when seen from the perspective of the Bodhisattva, it makes no difference. Because seen from this perspective, there is no me or another. Now this is one vow. Beings are numberless, I vow to awaken with them. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them. Buddha's way is unsurpassable, I vow to become it. Here's another gateway in. May I be a guard for those who are protectorless, a guide for those who journey on the road, for those who wish to go across the water. May I be a boat, a raft, a bridge. May I be an isle for those who yearn for landfall, and a lamp for those who long for light. For those who need a resting place, a bed. For all who need a support, may I be a friend. May I be the wishing jewel, the vase of plenty, a word of power and the supreme remedy. May I be the tree of miracles, and for every being, the abundant cow. Like the great earth and the other elements, enduring as the sky itself endures, for the boundless multitude of living beings, may I be the ground and vessel of their life. Thus, for every single thing that lives, in number like the boundless reaches of the sky, may I be their sustenance and nourishment until they pass beyond the bounds of suffering. So beautiful. And before I go on, I do have to admit that I've told some of you quite a few times that when I first heard metta practice, I felt nauseous and had to leave the room. And that lasted for a long time. And when I first heard about this Bodhisattva vow, it felt totally unrelatable. I was like, that place where, no way, I mean, I can barely keep my head above water. So this is just, this is not something that I can relate to. But then recently I've been feeling the calling of the vow, and in a way we've been practicing it because we've been sharing the merit of our practice so much. After every sitting, sharing the merit or appreciating the beautiful qualities, or after our group sharing, in midday we share the merit of the practice, and there's some way then that we're acknowledging that our practice isn't just for the benefit of ourselves individually or even for us as a community, but it's a benefit for all beings. And it's one of the wonderful things about being a vehicle in speaking the Dhamma is that as you say the words sometimes, as a vehicle of speaking the Dhamma, I sometimes am struck by my own words, and somehow they penetrate more deeply than when I was writing them on a piece of paper or thinking about them before I share them. And last night I was really struck about sort of riffing around my X's and how when I make everyone an X, they become relatable and lovable, even though when I look back on some of my X's now, they are in very different places and spaces than we are here. And yet, because there's been that intimacy and that touching, they live in my heart. And so I was thinking about that, and then I was thinking about reincarnation, because that contemplation last night of sending all beings metta is close to the Bodhisattva invitation, except that it's even more vast because it's for all beings through all times. And then I thought, well, going back to the X's, if I believe in reincarnation, and then, which I do, and I'll just say a few examples of why, then in all my previous lifetimes and all those X's, I would want to support as well and send metta to. And for all my future X's, I would want to support and keep in my heart as well. So it's on this theme of making it real. So when I was the resident teacher at Insight Meditation Society, at one lunchtime I was called over, and Christina Feldman was there, Joseph, Sharon, Christina, Narayan and myself. We were the teachers there. And they said they'd just received a tape. And the tape was of an Indian child of 2 years old or 3 years old chanting in perfect old Pali the suttas. And that this child could do it for hours and hours. Just like chanting the suttas. And so our discussion there, and that's why I remember it was a fall day and a little chilly, but it was so interesting, was this fake? Was it real? Is it a testimony to reincarnation? Is there another explanation? And the person who brought the tape came over and vowed that it really was authentic. So there we were, listening to the suttas chanted in old Pali that no one speaks anymore. I met him because he actually was part of the first teacher's training, and he said that as he grew older, he forgot, and he wasn't able to chant anymore. But something about it coming through him touched him, and so he started practicing the Dhamma, and then through various channels got into the teacher training that was the first teacher's training. And he was a very unusual and lovely being, Indian man. And then I know you all must have heard the stories of Tibetan lamas who have dreams about where the new reincarnation of old masters who have just died are. And they wait for the dreams, and the dreams are detailed enough that they travel to the places that most resemble the dream, the place, and sometimes have to sort of go and ask in houses. And with them, they bring the bowl of the master and some of the master's beads and other very special objects that the previous master had. And I haven't heard this about a great female Tibetan practitioner, so probably because of patriarchy and sexism. So anyway, so they go to these villages and they present the young child who is in the dream the bowl and the beads of the previous reincarnation, but also other bowls and beads. And time again, over these very different, many different years and teachers who have died in their reincarnation, those children choose, without doubt and without hesitation, the beads, the cloth, and the bowl of the previous master. And I read from one teacher just that it's just like this one child that he said. It was when I was in a retreat with Sokni Rinpoche, and we were talking about it. And this student talked about his teacher telling him about this. That the young child was like, yes, these are mine. And even though his parents, because he was like 4 or something, didn't want him to go to the monastery because that's the tradition, is that when you choose the things, then you are taken away from your parents and you're taken to the monastery to be trained. And because he was so young, his parents didn't want him to go. And he said no to his parents, no, I have to go, this is my life. So this continuity of lifetime after lifetime, you don't have to believe it. I have found so much of the Buddha's teaching to be true, even though I haven't directly experienced my previous reincarnations or my future ones. I do take this sort of teaching under advisement, and somehow just in my body it makes sense. It makes sense that we are coming and going, living and purifying for those of us who are on the path. At least anyway. And then as I contemplate that, the future becomes very visceral for me. But it comes visceral in 2 different ways. One is that when I look at political change, it isn't just for this lifetime that I have this attachment to everything being achieved, because they're very long-term struggles. And I know that I love to quote a lot of people. I do, partly to honor them, but partly to give reality to all these people who have given their lives in the understanding that this is a very long-term struggle. So I want to, you probably all have heard that hundreds of journalists have been murdered in Mexico. The journalists who have been breaking stories and telling the truth, especially about the army and the police force and how they're in collusion with gangs. And the last journalist just died in this July too, Ruben Pat Couch and Louis, oh, I'm sorry about my accent, Luis Perez Garua. And they're bringing to 8, this was in July, 8 journalists had been killed from January to July this year. And Pat's killing was just a week after Luis's killing, and he was 80 years old, and they worked for the same newspaper. And so have Raul Marcial Perez in Oaxaca, Alfonso Guzina in Veracruz, Teresa Bautista Marino in Oaxaca, Claudia Rodriguez Luis, and hundreds more. And when you're a journalist breaking news, you know that your contemporaries have been murdered, and yet you're still doing it. And the only way you could do it is because you understand you are part of a lineage of the generations before and the generations to come, working and dedicating themselves to the truth. And then I just wanted to also honor Ruth Slovo, who was my mother left home at 12 years old, and because her family was very poor and they couldn't support her anymore, and she actually went to live with the Slovos until she was 15, when then she left and became independent. And Ruth Slovo's mother was an early activist and socialist. And so Ruth and my mother grew up in it wasn't called the left-wing book club, but they studied, like Ruth's mother studied, and they were committed activists and socialists. And so my mother grew up with that, and so did Ruth. And they joined the Communist Party together. Ruth married Joe Slovo. My mom married my father. And that Ruth and Joe stayed in the Communist Party. My parents left, and my parents were part of ARM, which was one fraction of the underground movement, and Ruth and Joe stayed with the Communist Party and did work. Anyway, when they were all arrested, some people got particularly targeted, and so did Ruth, because she was such a leader in the movement. And she was in solitary 118 days over and over again. And when they released her, she escaped to Mozambique. And her daughter, Sean Slovo, wrote the movie A World Apart, if any of you saw that. I don't know if you did. And Sean and I were sort of the same age, so we hung out together. And then Robin, the next daughter, was friends with my sister Sandra, and she's a novelist now. Anyway, just to say, what's happened over time to the family. But when Ruth was in Mozambique, and she just kept on, doing organizing in Mozambique, trying to bring people who were underground out of the country so they could continue to work. She opened a letter, and it seemed a thick letter that it seemed like it was from Sean and Robin, and it was a letter bomb, and so she was murdered. And so just honoring so many of my and our wider compatriots, and let's call in Angela Davis as well. She's not dead, thank goodness, but deeply dedicated in the ways that we're talking about, where we place ourselves as bodhisattvas, as carriers of truth and of justice through the generations. And not that they said, I am going to continue this work until all sentient beings are saved. But that's what they were doing through their journalism or through their political activism. They were saying, I want to support changing the life of people that I don't know. But because we aren't separate and we all one, I'm dedicating my life to their well-being. So this is Sokni's father, who was definitely a bodhisattva, Neo Kempo. And I think I have shared with some of you the story of how when he was dying, and Sokni was saying to him, look, you have to rest. He called him Rinpoche, actually. He never said dad. It was interesting set of formal relationships. But anyway, you know, you have to rest Rinpoche, and there was this long line of people who were waiting to see him, because like Deepa Ma, he was this amazing being, just emanating unconditional love. And when I hear that story, it seems so close to the story of Jesus and the sort of ways that, I don't know if, am I remembering correctly that Jesus did healings on people? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So just that, or if not a direct healing, just this amazing presence that is like a balm to our heart and mind is struggling. And so there were always these long lines out. And actually, that was true for Sokni too. When I was practicing in his monastery, his house was at the bottom of the hill, and I would go down for an interview, and his living room was always full of people, mostly monks and nuns who had just come from Tibet, you know, who were seeking help, but other people too, just always tons of people. So anyway, he refused to stop seeing people until he said to Sokni, okay, now I need a break. He had been sitting by the window in a chair, looking out at the long people. People had been coming in and leaving the room. He said, now I need a moment, and he died in that chair. Mm-hmm. Just such a capacity of generosity and giving. This is what he says. He says, the primary distinction between the deluded mind and the enlightened mind is mainly a difference of narrowness and openness, being narrow-minded versus open-minded. The more constricted and narrow our attitudes are, the more ego-centered we are. The more open our attitude, the more conscious we are of everyone's well-being. Thus the entire path from an ordinary sentient being to Buddhahood is the gradual opening of the heart and mind. So simple, so beautiful. So there's something very beautiful about placing ourselves in this path and placing ourselves in the context of our past and of our future, is because it challenges that narrowness of mind, that kind of like that I am experience, like this is me and mine, and sort of places us more as a community rather than an individual practitioner. And what we're doing here, and why we have group sharing and how powerful they are, is because aren't we trying to find the balance between the accounting for the life that we've been given. This is the life, this is where I feel and experience my narrowness, and this is the life as part of other lives in my community. And how can I reframe it in a way that supports the narrowness opening? Because that's what placing ourselves in community does, right? And then I wanted to just name something that someone said to me in this retreat that really struck me, and they said, and they probably don't feel this anymore, it's hopeless. Things don't seem to change. It seems like we go through the same thing over and over and over again. Both as communities, that we go through the whole thing about centered products, our privilege, our white privilege, and our racism, for those of us who are white, and for the people who use centered products, of course, who aren't chemically sensitive, and all the other places where we're privileged and nothing changes. But when we place ourselves in the context, in a larger context, then it feels so clear to me how much things have changed. So some of you know that I lived at Owl Farm, which was the first only woman's land in the country in Oregon, and it was exclusively for women. And so of course it was mostly lesbian. In fact, when I was there was no straight woman there, pretty much. And we had this beautiful vision of, we are going to move out of the context of patriarchy and capitalism and build our own community. We're going to be self-sufficient. We're going to grow our own food. We're going to build our houses. We're going to, we're going to do something beautiful. And we experimented wildly, which some of you who've also been on other pieces of women land know. We insisted that monogamy was patriarchal, so no one could have just one girlfriend, for example. And we shared everything. Every blanket. Nothing was private community, was private property, because that was part of the capitalist culture we're trying to change. So we all got scabies. And we had meetings that lasted 8 hours because we didn't know properly how to run meetings. But maybe most intensely, we thought every feeling was the truth. Every feeling we had, if I was angry, then it was for a good reason, and I got to dump it on whoever I was angry with or for the whole community. And if I was jealous, then it was for good reason. And there was no guideline. There was no guideline. We went crazy with each other. And the result was that within 1.5 years, everyone left because no one could live with anyone else. That doesn't mean to say that there weren't exquisite moments, because there were. A lot of the songs, like "Blessed Are We, Freedom of We," came from that generation and era. We made up amazing songs. We drummed and danced at night, and connected in ways that many of us had never connected with the earth and the moonlight and before. And we opened up. We opened up our views, and that was amazing. And I feel proud of our failures, like Darcy Ramiro in that reading from Eduardo Galeano that I read in one of the Dhamma talks, which is "My failures are my dignities." I felt like I learned so much from how we failed. And when I sit here with our commitment to non-harming, to right speech, to cultivating caring, to having a practice that supports us to do that, to reframe political work in ways that really do become visionary and liberating, I feel like that, at least for me, my past became that past, and my mistakes have become the conditions for this and for creating this kind of retreat. And so I have tremendous faith in what we're doing and the power of what we're doing as we carry it forward, especially if we name it in the larger context than just my enlightenment, which is good, right? Freeing the mind and heart. So we're co-creating something special. And then I want to acknowledge again, just because it almost bears acknowledgement in every Dhamma talk. And Jean began with her beautiful blessing for us. What it means to be now the richest man in the world, who's the guy who owns Amazon, Bezos, and only pay workers $7 an hour. Now he had to move it up just now, but $7 an hour, because it's impossible to live on $7 an hour. That disregard for the humanity of thousands of beings who work for Amazon. And the worst paid are the clickers who receive our orders through the internet. Mm-hmm. They're paid the least. And then I want to read this. There's a reason I want to acknowledge it. These journals are amazing. I don't know if you've seen them before live. They're amazing. Journal of Materialist Feminism. And it begins with, everything we write will be used against us, which is true. Good. Okay. Earlier that day, Roseanne, the new director of nursing, had asked us to gather around in our different units as she made her way through the nursing home. She had an announcement to make. Instead of 4 CNAs on the floor, we would have 3. The 4th would then be designated as the shower aide, and this person would give showers all day. Showers that had once been distributed among the 3 different shifts would now all be completed in the day shift, and only 3 CNAs would be left to care for the residents. It's not that different from what you have now, she said with a smile on her face. I'm new here and I want to improve things. It's more efficient this way. Come to my office if you have any concerns. She smiled knowingly. Yeah. Is it possible to hire another person to work as a full-time shower aide? We really need 4 people on the floor, I blurted out. She smiled knowingly. No. If we hire 1 more person, we'll have to cut all your hours. Would you want that? Come talk to me if you have any further questions. Her words hung in the silence of the semicircle that shuffled around her. My co-workers and I exchanged looks with one another. If we went into her office one-on-one, we would be targeted. It was a trap. So they get together. So one of the CNAs says, Remy, the 20-year-old veteran, they can't treat us like dogs. I can't do it. I'm too old. Many nods follow. Lorena, you tell me, how can I do this? 10 to 12 residents each? I can't. It's too much. These people are crazy. Do they care about the residents, about us? As Merritt exclaimed. Anyway, then they start getting together and they try to organize and they try to go together as a group. And they go to the human resource person, and then the human resource person gets the director in, and they meet with the director, and they're asking for different things and saying, if you don't give it to us, we'll form a union. And so the very next day, the director of nursing sits down with them in a huge meeting, and she says, if you form unions, we have no choice but to fire you. That is so common. That is so common. I mean, I myself have been in an experience like that. But I'm saying it because do you get how much the feelings we have of not being good enough comes in these institutionalized forms of relationship where we're only paid $7 an hour for working, or where we are forced to work in inhuman conditions, so many of us. Like, just to acknowledge as a community that message of disregard that is being communicated all the time. And as living, permeable beings, how could we not have moments and many more of turning against ourselves, of judging ourselves, of feeling that we're not good enough, not working hard enough, or not doing whatever we're doing well enough? Because that's the message. And so when we place ourselves as bodhisattvas, it changes it. in the same way that when women first got together in consciousness raising groups, that's at least, well, because there were some early consciousness raising groups in New York of people of color too, so I want to just say, I want to acknowledge many of us got together in consciousness raising groups and were moving our individual experience and putting it into a political context. And we can't forget to do that again, consciously, that our experiences are not just personal experiences, but they don't talk about it as consciousness raising in the Mahayana tradition. They talk about it as a Bodhisattva ideal, or the practice of the Bodhisattva. But it's the same. It's putting our efforts into the context of what's happening, and placing the narrowness of our hearts and the suffering of that in the political context, and saying, of course, and we can't do one without the other. So, see, even the universe, like, agreed at the most important point of my Dhamma talk. So this is what the Bodhisattva commitment does. I'm part of something larger. I'm here to save myself and myself in the past and myself in the future, especially with climate change. My reincarnation selves, all of our reincarnation selves, are going to be living in a world that is going to be very, very difficult. You know, if we have 12 years, we have 12 years to save our world, according to some climate activists. So I want to name that these places of constriction are not personal. They are reflections of our culture, and they do not reflect the real beauty of our being. And part of our practice is remembering that, and we do through taking the refuges. There is a traditional practice for becoming a bodhisattva, and that is the practice of cultivating the paramis. So I know it's late, and so I can't go into them all right now. But I wanted to just name, name in the Mahayana tradition, the 6 that is seen as critical, and maybe just say a few words about the first one. And the practice of becoming a bodhisattva rests on the practice of generosity, ethical living or morality, patience, persistence, calm, and wisdom. I want to name the generosity of all those supervisors of small towns that have to meet over and over again to make decisions without being paid. Because I am in some meetings, and really not my best self comes out some of the time. some of you in board meetings with me know that. But when I lived in Northampton, I was really close to one of the supervisors who was on the board of supervisors. And they so generously gave their time to run a small town, an unincorporated town, without any remuneration. And how many towns are run that way? It's amazing. And if, people asked me if I would join the board when I was living in Northampton. I was like, no way. I just want to acknowledge something as sort of what we take for granted. Or maybe we don't take for granted that tremendous amount of generosity, or all the hours that many of you spend supporting the Dharma in board meetings, in finance committee meetings, in looking at bank accounts, in being a project manager, in organizing sittings, in doing my newsletter, in organizing retreats. The Buddha said that let me see if I have it here, and then I'll stop. It's just so beautiful. Oh, I don't have it here. Okay. He said, if you give, you always receive many more times back. And then if you give to animals, it's so many blessings back. If you give to a human being, it's many more. If you give to the Sangha, it's many, many, many more. But he said, if you create the conditions for the Dharma and give to the Dharma, the blessings are uncountable. Isn't that just so deep and so beautiful? So so maybe I'll just read this last poem to end with then, as Bodhisattvas. I used to read this poem a lot and got lost in some papers. It's called A Great Need, but I don't know who the author is. Out of a great need, we are all holding hands and climbing. Not loving is a forgetting. Listen. The terrain around here is far too dangerous for that. Out of a great need, we are all holding hands and climbing. Not loving is a forgetting. Listen, the terrain around here is far too dangerous for that. So let's sit for a moment.